Hello everyone and welcome to Fiction Friday. Today we have episode 30 of The Squire. I hope you enjoy it.
Cole and Talia entered the throne room and found King Jared, Rain, and Michael waiting for them. Talia went first and Cole followed, the pole with the soul box balanced on his shoulder. By the light, he'd be glad not to have to lug the damn thing around anymore. Cole! Rain rushed toward him, ignoring Talia altogether. She wrapped her arms around his neck. He felt a little awkward hugging another woman with Talia standing right beside him. It worked! Your idea about my power! He tried to remember exactly what he told her and failed. That's great! Can I put this thing somewhere? The king chuckled. Just set the ugly thing on the floor anywhere. Cole did as the king said, careful not to get the soul box close to anyone. Everyone gathered around and looked at the box. So how do we smash it? Talia and Michael exchanged a look before Michael said, Up close, it's considerably more powerful than I expected. I thought a circle of light casters combining their power would do the trick, but now I'm less certain. I think we'll need at least 2 talismans to focus the power with greater precision. Cole groaned. Where do I have to go to fetch your talismans? Talia smiled at him, and for a moment he thought a frown creased Rain's lips. But when he looked her way, he found her expression neutral. You don't need to go anywhere. My dear husband holds 1 talisman, and Rain has the power to summon the second. Rain's eyes widened. My family's sword? We haven't gotten to the 3rd phase of my training. I don't know how to summon the sword. Calm down, Michael said. Summoning the sword is the 3rd and final phase of your training. You need to call the power into your hands like we did in training. Then imagine you're holding the sword. Picture the weapon in your mind until it becomes real to you, and the magic will do the rest. She looked at Cole with fear in her eyes. I don't know if I can do this. I haven't even held a sword. Cole grinned. I can help with that. He drew his sword and offered it to her hilt first. She hesitated, then wrapped her hands around the hilt. When he let go, the blade clanged on the floor. Heavier than I thought. It's easier to cut people if it's got some heft. Let me help you. Cole stepped behind Rain, reached around her and put his hands around hers on the hilt. He guided her through a couple of crosscuts just to give her an idea of how it balanced. Okay? Okay, I'm ready to try it. Cole took his sword back and moved to what he hoped was a safe distance. You can do this. Rain felt bereft when Cole reclaimed his sword and stepped away. She didn't know why having him close by made her feel safe, but it did. She put Cole out of her mind and focused on the task at hand. First, she let her power flow down into her hands. The power came so fast and easily she wanted to shout for joy. Rain set the emotion aside and remembered Cole's sword in her hands, the heft, and the rough texture of the grip. She tried to remember her father carrying the family blade at his side, the golden ball at the end of the hilt, the silver mesh wrapping the grip. Come to me. You're my birthright. Come to me now. Something tugged at her and she pulled back. The sword wanted to come to her, but some power held it in place. She pulled again, harder. Come to me. Rain woke up on the cold stone of the palace floor. Her head throbbed and she groaned. Did I succeed? Welcome back. She turned her head and found Cole sitting on the floor beside her. The family sword rested beside him. He smiled down at her. Congratulations. She slid around and rested her head on his knee. I did it! Thank you for everything. You're very welcome, Princess. Are you strong enough to stand? Yeah. He got up and offered her a hand. Rain let him pull her to her feet. Everyone looked at her and smiled. Michael came over and hugged her. You are a fine pupil. Well done, Rain. Talia said. We should destroy the soul box as soon as possible. Rain blinked. She'd forgotten for a moment that retrieving the sword was only part of the task at hand. She bent down and picked up her sword. It was lighter than Cole's. Runes glittered on the blade. She'd never noticed them before. What do they say? Princess? Cole raised an eyebrow. She must have spoken out loud. I wondered what the runes meant. Be true to your duty lest darkness walk the land once more. Talia said. "You're a credit to your bloodline, Rain." Rain ran her finger down the flat of the blade, the characters engraved in the metal rough against her finger. Duty never meant much to her, but she was beginning to understand. "I'm ready." Michael went to one of the other doors out of the throne room, and when he returned, 6 people in Lightcaster robes followed. They formed a circle around the soul box, leaving 2 gaps. The king drew his sword, an exact replica of hers save for the device engraved on the pommel, and stepped into one of the gaps. Talia stood behind him and placed her hands on his shoulders. Rain took a breath and stepped into the second gap. Michael stood behind her and placed his hands on her shoulders. "Place the tip of your sword on the box." Rain did what he said at the same time King Jared mirrored her with his sword. When both swords touched the box, the 6 Lightcasters raised their hands. A bright white glow filled the room. The blade of her sword blazed with white fire. Lances of energy shot from the caster's hands and struck the box. Vibrations ran through the grip and into her hands. Rain struggled to hold the tip steady. Warmth flowed through her, and she knew the power came from Michael. Through her connection to the light, everyone's determination to shatter the abomination before them reached her. Distantly, Cole urged her on even as he worried that she was okay. She drew strength from everyone's effort and poured her will into smashing the box. As she fought, she sensed, even more distantly, a cold, dark presence straining to hold the box together. Rain clenched her teeth. That monster destroyed her kingdom, enslaved her people, and murdered her parents. No matter what, she wouldn't let him win this fight. She leaned on the sword, pressing it even harder into the box. Cracks appeared in the flawless surface, and an instant later she went flying. Strong arms caught her and lowered her to the ground. "Are you okay?" Cole asked. "Did we do it?" He grinned his familiar grin. "You sure did. Take a peek." Cole helped her turn around, and she saw the twisted metal of the cage that had surrounded the soul box. But of the box itself, nothing remained. She slumped in his arms. "I hope I don't have to do that again right away." Zarin paced the courtyard of Fine Gold Castle and seethed. He had to flee from that bitch. It wasn't her power that balked him, but rather the wards combined with all the power he expended trying to kill the boy that weakened him enough that she could force him back. If he ever caught her in an even fight, he'd rip her wings off. A pulse of light magic made him flinch. Annoyed, he sought the source and found the buried sword pulsing with energy. He studied the magic and after a second recognized the summoning. The princess was trying to reclaim her birthright. Well, he couldn't have that. Zarin wrapped chains of dark power around the blade to lock it in place. The power intensified, and before he could reinforce the bindings, the chains shattered and the sword vanished. Zarin snarled a curse that would have slain any living thing in the courtyard had there been anyone to slay. Insects. Insects threatened his great work. First the boy, then that pitiful excuse for an angel, now the princess. It was an insult to his power. He staggered as something assaulted his essence. He knew this was coming. He'd known it since he had to flee without his soul box. A fresh jolt ran through him, not pain so much as the awareness that his very being was under assault. He could do nothing about it, only brace himself for the discomfort and use it to fuel his hate. He'd make them all pay for this affront. Despite his best efforts, when the box shattered, he fell to his knees. He wouldn't have thought the loss of such a small fragment of his essence would affect him so much, but it did. A little piece of him was gone, never to return. Worse, he was now vulnerable to destruction. The knowledge that he might cease, die for lack of a better term, both horrified and thrilled him. For the first time in a very long time, he was mortal, like his younger self when he first set out to recover his master's power and free the darkness from its eternal prison. It felt right that he should face the end of his mission in the same compromised state he began. Cole found a chair and sat. Michael and the exhausted Lightcasters had left a few minutes ago and took the remains of the cage with them. Rain and the royal couple still had their heads together, and they were close enough that Cole listened in. "What do I do now?" Rain held her sword point down a little ways away from her body like she was afraid it might bite her. Can I use it for anything else? Talia and the king shared a look, then turned back to Rain. Its main purpose is to serve as an anchor for the darkness's prison, Talia said. It can be used as a focus for rituals like the one we just finished, but other than that, it's simply a potent weapon. Perhaps we can arrange some weapons training for you. Cole allowed himself a small smile at the idea of Rain dressed in leathers sweating in a practice ring. Rain shook her head. In 10 years, maybe I'd be competent, but I'm too small to use a weapon like this well. There must be something else. I can't be the first woman to inherit one of these swords. The king nodded. Some women who've inherited a sword become great warriors, but most simply keep it safe until their children come of age. You have one other option, Talia said. You can designate a champion to wield the blade in your place. Some queens have offered that gift to their husbands. It's a simple ritual, but once done, you can't undo it, so you need to be certain. What do you mean it can't be undone? I mean, you can name only one champion in your lifetime, and it lasts until your chosen dies. I understand. Rain looked his way, and Cole knew what she intended. Squire Cole, come here, please. Cole got out of his chair and walked toward her. His mind raced. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be tied to Rain for the rest of his life. Another part of him said if he wanted to kill the Black Knight, he needed the sword's power. He stopped a few feet away. Princess? You've saved my life more times than I can count. You've encouraged me, made me laugh, and been my friend, though I hardly deserved it. You've been my champion in deed, if not in name, since we fled the castle together many weeks ago. Will you accept my family's sword and help me reclaim our homeland? Princess, I will. Rain turned to Talia. What do I do? Talia removed a small curved knife from the folds of her gown and handed it to Rain. Cut your thumb. Rain hesitated an instant before running the blade down her thumb. A thin trickle of blood leaked out. Now what? Give the knife to Cole. When he accepted the knife, Talia continued. Cut your thumb and press it against Rain's. Cole did as she said. The knife was sharp as a razor, and he hardly noticed the pain. Rain held her thumb up, and he pressed his against it. The blood mingled and dripped on his hand. That's good, Talia said. Now, while Rain holds the hilt, Cole, you put your hand on the pommel. You now have a tiny spark of celestial blood, so the sword should recognize you as a legitimate bearer. Cole glanced at her. Should? What happens if it doesn't? You die. You didn't think to mention that first? Would it have mattered? No. Cole grabbed the pommel before he could think too much. His head snapped back as the power running through it entered him. He saw it connected to Rain by a heavy cord of power. Another cord ran from the sword to the lake. He suspected if he could see outside, the beam of power would run all the way to the island in the center of the lake. He blinked. Damn me. Do you see all those beams? Beams? Rain shook her head. I don't see anything. Another gift of your ring, Talia said. You can see all the invisible connections. Cole held out his hand. May I? Not yet. Rain pulled the sword back. Take a knee. We need to do this properly. Cole grinned and did as she said. It wasn't midwinter night, but he figured it was close enough. He bowed his head. Rain touched both his shoulders with the sword. Rise, a true knight of Corinthia. Cole stood, and they shared a smile. She offered him the sword hilt first. He took it gently from her, amazed at how light it felt. He'd never held a finer weapon and suspected he never would if he lived 1,000 years. I will bear it with honor, Princess. A messenger chose that moment to burst into the throne room. Majesties, an army of beastmen is massing along our border. Thousands of them, perhaps tens of thousands.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Fiction Friday. If you liked what you heard, you can find more of my fiction on my website, jamesEwisher.com. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with anyone else you think might enjoy the show. Until next week, goodbye.